Communications Officer Velmar was having what he thought would be another boring night shift at the Galactic Communications Hub. The massive facility on Nexus Prime processed millions of signals every day from across the galaxy. Most of them, routine military reports or trade communications between the Empire's countless worlds. But at exactly 3:47 in the morning, his detection equipment started going crazy. The signal was coming from the outer rim, from a sector so unimportant that most officers couldn't even find it on a map. Sector 7742 was basically the middle of nowhere, home to nothing but a few dead rocks orbiting dying stars. At first, Velmar figured it was just some kind of stellar interference, maybe a dying star throwing off electromagnetic noise. But when he ran the signal through the pattern analysis computer, his 4 eyes went wide with disbelief. The crude electromagnetic burst wasn't random noise at all. Hidden inside the static were organized mathematical sequences, prime numbers arranged in perfect order, and what looked like primitive attempts at creating a universal language. This was the kind of signal that intelligent beings sent when they were trying to communicate with other intelligent beings. The problem was, according to every database in the Empire, there weren't supposed to be any intelligent beings in Sector 7742. Velmar's hands were shaking as he pulled up the sector files. The signal was coming from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The Empire had surveyed this world centuries ago and marked it as completely uninhabitable. The report said the planet had way too much oxygen in its atmosphere and was contaminated with primitive carbon-based life forms. Nothing there could possibly be intelligent, let alone capable of interstellar communication. But the evidence was right there on his screens. Someone or something on that blue planet was actively trying to talk to the stars. Meanwhile, millions of miles away on Earth, Dr. Jiho Park was pulling another late night at Seoul's Deep Space Institute. He'd been tracking unusual gravitational readings for weeks, tiny fluctuations that shouldn't exist in their solar system. Most of his colleagues thought he was wasting his time, but Jiho had always been stubborn about following data wherever it led. Tonight, the data was leading him to a terrifying conclusion. The gravitational anomalies weren't random. They were positioned in a perfect surveillance pattern around Earth's solar system, sitting right at the edge where they'd be almost impossible to detect. Whatever was causing these readings was artificial, and it was watching them. Jiho's coffee went cold as he ran the calculations again and again, hoping he'd made a mistake. But the math didn't lie. Earth was being observed by technology far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. The objects were using some kind of stealth system that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible to human sensors. Just down the hall, mathematician Dr. Minji Kim was having her own sleepless night. She'd been working on the strange signal patterns that several observatories had detected over the past month. At first, they looked like background radiation, but Minji had a gift for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. As she worked through the night, a picture began to emerge that made her blood run cold. The signals weren't random at all. They were scan patterns, the kind of systematic sweeps that a surveillance system would use to map everything in Earth's orbital space. Someone was out there, cataloging every satellite, every piece of space, debris, every human installation beyond Earth's atmosphere. Back at the Galactic Hub, Velmar's discovery had reached the desk of High Administrator Korkstel, one of the most senior officials in the Imperial bureaucracy. Korkstel had been managing galactic communications for over 2 centuries, and in all that time, he'd never seen anything like this report. The administrator's tentacles curled with anxiety as he read through the data. Independent technological development was supposed to be biologically impossible. Every species in the galaxy had been contacted and guided by the Empire when they reached a certain level of intelligence. It was the natural order of things, written into the laws of evolution itself. But this Earth seemed to have skipped that step entirely. Somehow these creatures had developed interstellar communication technology completely on their own. If they could do that, what else might they be capable of? The implications were staggering and terrifying. As emergency sessions began convening across the Imperial capital, both human and alien officials were asking the same question. If Earth had developed this far without contact, How much more advanced might they become? And what would happen when two civilizations that had never heard of each other finally met face to face? Commander Naxher had seen a lot of primitive worlds in his 300 years of service, but nothing had prepared him for what his reconnaissance fleet discovered at the edge of Earth's solar system. His ships hung invisible in the void, their advanced stealth systems making them undetectable to any known technology. At least that's what he thought. The first shock came when his sensors started cataloging Earth's orbital space. The planet was buzzing with activity that shouldn't exist. Thousands of artificial satellites circled the world, creating a complex network of communications and observation platforms. Primitive by imperial standards, but the sheer number was staggering. Most species barely managed to launch a single satellite before the Empire made contact with them. But humans had filled their entire orbital space with technology, and they'd done it in just a few decades. Naxhur's science officer, a nervous creature named Pixtal, kept double-checking the readings because they seemed impossible. According to their databases, humans had only achieved spaceflight about 70 years ago. In galactic terms, that was yesterday. Yet they already had permanent space stations, had landed on their moon multiple times, and were actively planning missions to other planets in their system. The second shock was even worse. Deep scans of Earth's surface revealed that humans had somehow developed atomic weapons. Not just simple fission bombs, but sophisticated thermonuclear devices capable of destroying entire cities. The Imperial fleet watched in horror as they detected thousands of these weapons scattered across the planet, all ready to launch at a moment's notice. This violated everything the Empire knew about natural evolution. Species were supposed to develop slowly, guided by Imperial wisdom to prevent them from destroying themselves. But humans had not only survived their atomic age, they seemed to be thriving in it. Their cities glowed with artificial light visible from orbit. Their information networks spanned continents, and their industrial capacity was growing at an exponential rate. What made it even more terrifying was that humans had no natural advantages that should have allowed this rapid development. They had no telepathic abilities, couldn't manipulate energy with their minds, and showed no signs of the enhancement technologies that other advanced species relied on. They were just basic carbon-based life forms with opposable thumbs and big brains, yet somehow they'd achieved in millennia what usually took hundreds of thousands of years. Meanwhile, back on Earth, President Dae-hyun Lee was having the worst week of his political career. The call had come in at 3 a.m, waking him from the first good sleep he'd had in months. Defense Minister Sung-ho Choi's voice was tight with stress as he explained the situation. Their most sensitive satellite networks had detected something that shouldn't exist. "We're being watched," Sung-ho had said, his words hanging heavy in the presidential bedroom. "There are objects at the edge of our solar system, and they're not ours." The emergency session that followed was unlike anything in human history. Military, leaders, scientists, and intelligence officials crowded into the secure conference room beneath the Blue House, all of them grappling with the same impossible reality. Earth was not alone, and whatever was out there had technology that made human achievements look like stone tools. Dr. Yeji Shin had been working around the clock since the discovery, her team at the National Space Institute analyzing every scrap of data they could gather. The surveillance patterns were subtle but unmistakable. Something was systematically scanning Earth's orbital space, mapping every satellite, every piece of debris, every human installation beyond the atmosphere. What made her skin crawl was how advanced the technology had to be. The objects were using some kind of stealth system that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible to human sensors. They should have been completely undetectable, but Yeji had noticed something the aliens apparently hadn't considered. When the invisible ships moved between Earth and distant stars, they caused tiny fluctuations in stellar brightness that could be measured if you knew what to look for. "They're not trying to hide from us specifically," Yeji explained to the tense room full of officials. "Their stealth technology is designed to be invisible to sensors much more advanced than ours. The fact that we can detect them at all is probably an accident. They don't think we're advanced enough to notice." The implications were terrifying and insulting at the same time. Earth was being studied like bacteria under a microscope by beings who considered humans too primitive to even notice their presence. But humans had noticed. and now they faced a choice that would determine the future of their entire species. As reports continued flowing in from observatories around the world, one thing became clear. The Watchers had been there for months, possibly years, cataloging human capabilities and weaknesses. The question was no longer whether contact would happen, but when and whether humanity would survive the encounter. Dr. Haiyan Wu hadn't slept in 3 days. His team at the Busan Observatory had been working around the clock, confirming what everyone had hoped was just a mistake. But the data was undeniable. Multiple artificial objects were sitting at the edge of their solar system, maintaining perfect positions like sentries watching over Earth. The observatory's main telescope had been repurposed into humanity's most important surveillance tool. Every few hours, Haiyan Wu's team would track the gravitational shadows of the invisible ships, marking their positions on star charts that looked more like a military tactical map than an astronomy project. The objects weren't moving randomly. They were positioned to give whoever was inside them a perfect view of everything happening on and around Earth. What made Haiyan Wu's stomach turn was the realization of how long they'd probably been there. Going back through months of archived telescope data, his team found evidence of the same gravitational anomalies dating back almost 2 years. The Watchers had been studying humanity for a long time, learning everything about human capabilities while remaining completely hidden. But now, humans knew they were there, and the world's leaders were facing the most important decision in human history: hide and hope the aliens would go away, or do something that would change everything forever. President Dae-hyun Lee made the choice in a secure bunker deep beneath Seoul. The emergency cabinet meeting had been going for hours, with intelligence, officials, military commanders, and scientists all arguing about the right course of action. Some wanted to try diplomatic contact, others suggested going into hiding, but the president had a different idea entirely. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done it already, he said, his voice cutting through the arguments. They're studying us, which means they're trying to decide what to do with us. I think it's time we showed them exactly what kind of species they're dealing with. General Su-Yung-jang had been quietly coordinating global military forces for the past week, working through secure channels with defense ministers from every major nation. The plan they'd developed was unprecedented in human history. For the first time ever, every military force on Earth would work together toward a single goal, not to fight each other but to send a message to the stars. The coordination was incredible to watch. American nuclear submarines surfaced simultaneously in 3 different oceans. Russian missile forces went to high alert while Chinese satellite networks began broadcasting encrypted military communications that any advanced listener would easily decode. European defense systems activated across the continent, while aircraft carriers from multiple nations formed battle groups in international waters. The message was clear to anyone watching from space. Humanity was not a helpless, primitive species. They were a unified military force capable of coordinating complex operations across their entire planet. If these aliens were looking for easy prey, they were looking at the wrong species. While General Jang orchestrated the military display, Dr. Minho Bae was working on something even more dramatic. His team at the Korean Advanced Institute of Technology had been tasked with preparing technical specifications that would demonstrate human capabilities in terms any advanced civilization would understand. The data package was terrifying in its thoroughness. Detailed blueprints of nuclear weapons, including the physics behind fusion reactions, specifications for chemical and biological weapons that humans had developed but chosen not to deploy, industrial capacity reports showing how quickly humanity could manufacture weapons when threatened, and perhaps most importantly, historical documentation of every major war in human history, with emphasis on how humans had survived and adapted to increasingly deadly conflicts. We're not trying to threaten them, Dr. Bae explained to his nervous team. We're showing them that we're not victims, we're survivors, and survivors are dangerous when cornered. The culmination of humanity's response came from an idea that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. If the aliens wanted to see what humans were capable of, they would get a front-row seat to humanity's most terrifying achievement. The nuclear device was positioned on the far side of the moon. away from Earth but clearly visible to any observers in the outer solar system. It wasn't the largest weapon in humanity's arsenal, but it was big enough to create a flash of light that would be impossible to miss. When it detonated, the explosion would be visible to every telescope on Earth and every stealth ship watching from the darkness. Diplomat Yoonji Lim had been chosen to craft the message that would accompany the demonstration. Her words were simple but carried the weight of an entire species behind them. The transmission would go out simultaneously with the nuclear flash, ensuring that any observers would understand that the explosion was intentional, controlled, and directed at them. "We know you're there," the message began. "We're not afraid." What followed was a comprehensive introduction to humanity that no alien species had ever received before. Technical specifications for weapons systems, industrial reports, and something that made the alien observers across the galaxy pause in horror. Detailed historical documentation of humanity's capacity for warfare, complete with footage from every major conflict of the past century. As the countdown reached 0 and the lunar surface lit up with nuclear fire, humanity had sent the most uniquely human message possible to the stars. They weren't asking for help, begging for mercy, or hiding in fear. They were announcing their presence to the galaxy as a species that had earned their place through strength, ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. The explosion on Earth's moon sent shockwaves through the imperial capital that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with pure terror. High Chancellor Morketh had been enjoying what he thought would be a routine day of administrative duties when the emergency alert reached his office. The message was simple but earth-shattering. The primitive species from Sector 7742 had just detonated a nuclear weapon in space, while broadcasting detailed military specifications directly at Imperial observation posts. For the first time in over 3 centuries, the full Imperial Council was being called into emergency session. Representatives from thousands of worlds began arriving at the capital, their ships filling the orbital space around the massive government complex. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. In the million-year history of the Empire, no species had ever responded to first contact with a military demonstration. High Chancellor Morketh spent the hours before the session reviewing humanity's file, and what he found made his blood run cold. These creatures had progressed from simple agriculture to nuclear weapons in just 10,000 years. Most species took at least 100,000 years to make that same journey, and they did it with Imperial guidance. Humans had done it completely alone, and they'd done it 10 times faster than should have been possible. But the speed wasn't even the most terrifying part. The historical record showed that humans had survived multiple extinction-level events, including several they'd caused themselves. They'd endured ice ages, volcanic catastrophes, plagues that killed millions, and 2 global wars that involved every nation on their planet. Each time, instead of being weakened, they'd emerged stronger and more technologically advanced. The Chancellor's tentacles trembled as he read about humanity's response to their own near extinction during what they called World War II. Instead of learning to avoid conflict, they'd developed weapons powerful enough to destroy their entire planet. Then, instead of using those weapons to wipe themselves out, they'd somehow managed to create a balance of terror that had prevented major wars for decades while simultaneously advancing their technology at an unprecedented rate. When the council session finally began, the vast chamber was filled with representatives from every major species in the Empire. The Zeftari delegation, known for their aggressive nature, were actually advocating for immediate military intervention. The scholarly Mordoon, who usually opposed any form of violence, were in complete agreement. Both factions had reached the same terrifying conclusion: humanity represented an existential threat to the established galactic order. "These creatures don't follow the normal rules of evolution," announced the Zeftari military commander, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They've weaponized their own extinction events. When disease threatened them, they created medicine. When ice ages came, they built shelters. When they ran out of resources, they learned to create artificial ones. Every challenge that should have destroyed them only made them stronger." The Morden chief scientist was even more disturbed by humanity's psychological profile. They don't seek guidance from superior beings. They don't show reverence for established authority. When they discovered they were being observed, their first instinct wasn't to hide or submit. It was to demonstrate their capacity for violence. This suggests a level of territorial aggression that we've never encountered before. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human response to the crisis was everything the Imperial observers had feared and more. Ambassador Hajino had been working around the clock, coordinating with diplomats from every major nation to prepare for what might be humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. But unlike every other species in galactic history, humans weren't preparing to surrender or beg for guidance. Instead, they were preparing to negotiate as equals. The preparation sessions were unlike anything in diplomatic history. Rather than figuring out how to appease potentially superior beings, human diplomats were crafting strategies for mutual cooperation between independent civilizations. They were preparing cultural exchange programs, trade agreements, and scientific cooperation treaties. The idea that they might be expected to submit to alien authority simply hadn't occurred to them. Admiral Borum Kang was coordinating Earth's rapidly expanding defense network, and the progress was staggering. In just a few weeks since discovering they were being watched, humanity had launched more satellites than they'd put into orbit in the previous decade. New tracking stations were being built on every continent, while existing military installations were being retrofitted with equipment designed to detect and potentially target stealth technology. The most disturbing part, from the Imperial perspective, was how quickly humans had adapted to the threat. They'd reverse-engineered principles of stealth technology just from observing its effects, then started developing countermeasures. Military production facilities around the world were working overtime, creating weapons and detection systems specifically designed to fight an enemy with superior technology. Intelligence Director Jiwon Seo had been analyzing the alien communication patterns, and her conclusions were changing how humanity viewed their place in the universe. The observers represented a vast galactic empire that had probably existed for millions of years. They were used to being the dominant force in the galaxy, contacting primitive species and guiding their development according to imperial principles. But humanity had developed independently, without imperial guidance, and had done so at a speed that shouldn't have been possible. For the first time in their history, the Empire was facing a species that might actually be able to challenge their supremacy. As reports flowed in from across the galaxy, one thing became clear to both humans and aliens. The age of imperial dominance was about to end, not because of rebellion from within, but because a species too stubborn to submit had announced their presence to the stars. The Imperial delegation arrived at Earth 6 months after humanity's nuclear demonstration, expecting to follow a protocol that had worked perfectly for over 1 million years. Their massive ship, designed to inspire awe and submission in primitive species, took position in Earth's orbital space while broadcasting the standard message of imperial benevolence. They offered humanity protection, guidance, and the privilege of joining the galaxy's greatest civilization as a junior member under imperial oversight. What they received in response shattered every assumption they'd ever made about how first contact was supposed to work. Ambassador Kyung-Soo-an sat across from the imperial negotiators in a conference room aboard the alien vessel, but the dynamic was nothing like what the Empire expected. Instead of the grateful submission they were used to, An presented a detailed counterproposal that treated the Empire as just another nation to negotiate with, not as supreme overlords to be obeyed. "We appreciate your offer," An said calmly, sliding a thick document across the table, "but Earth has a different proposal. We're interested in mutual recognition as sovereign equals, with exchanges of technology, culture, and scientific knowledge. We believe both our civilizations would benefit from cooperation between independent partners." The imperial negotiators stared at the document in complete bewilderment. In their entire history, no species had ever presented them with a counterproposal to imperial protectorate status. The very concept of treating the Empire as an equal partner was so foreign that they literally didn't have words for it in their language. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the lead imperial diplomat said, his translator struggling with concepts that had never been needed before. "We're offering you protection and guidance. You would become part of the Empire, under our supervision. This is how all civilizations join the galactic community. An's response was polite but firm. That's how other civilizations joined your empire. Earth considers itself ready for direct galactic citizenship. We've developed independently, we've proven our technological capabilities, and we're prepared to defend our sovereignty if necessary. We're not looking for a master, we're looking for neighbors. While the diplomatic negotiations continued, Dr. Taehyun Jung was proving that humanity's confidence wasn't just bluster. His team at the Seoul Institute of Technology had accomplished something the Empire considered impossible. Working with nothing but passive sensor readings and theoretical physics, they'd reverse-engineered the basic principles behind Imperial stealth technology. The breakthrough had come when Jung realized that the alien stealth systems worked by bending light around objects, creating a kind of optical camouflage. Human scientists had been working on similar concepts for decades, but seeing the technology in action had given them the final pieces they needed. Within months, they'd built crude but functional versions of stealth generators and deployed them throughout Earth's solar system. The first test had been terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. A human satellite had simply vanished from all detection systems, invisible to both human and alien sensors. When they'd successfully brought it back online, the celebration at the research facility had lasted until dawn. Humanity had just proven they could match Imperial technology, at least in some areas. The Imperial observers watching from the edge of the solar system had been shocked to discover that their surveillance posts were suddenly detecting human-built stealth fields. The species that should have been grateful for Imperial contact was instead demonstrating that they could steal Imperial technology and improve upon it in just a few months. But the final shock came when Captain Nari Cho's ship launched from Earth's orbital shipyard. The vessel was unlike anything humans had ever built before, combining reverse-engineered alien technology with uniquely human innovations. It was part diplomatic transport, part research vessel, and part warship, designed to carry humanity's first interstellar mission to the Imperial capital. The ship represented everything the Empire feared about humanity. It was proof that humans could adapt alien technology, improve upon it, and deploy it faster than should have been possible. More importantly, it carried both diplomatic envoys and military escorts, making it clear that humanity viewed interstellar diplomacy as something that required the backup of military force. As Captain Cho prepared for humanity's first journey beyond their solar system, the Imperial Council was facing a reality that none of them had ever imagined. For the first time in their million-year history, they were dealing with a species that refused to be conquered, guided, or controlled. Humanity had looked at the Empire's offer of protection and responded with a counteroffer of partnership between equals. The age of Imperial supremacy was ending, not because of rebellion from conquered worlds, but because a species too stubborn to surrender had forced the galaxy to recognize that there were other ways to approach interstellar civilization. The Empire had always grown by absorbing smaller civilizations into their hierarchy, but humanity had proven that independent development was possible, and their example was already inspiring other species throughout the galaxy to question Imperial authority. As the first human interstellar ship prepared to depart Earth, carrying diplomats ready to negotiate as equals and soldiers ready to defend their independence, the galaxy was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. The Empire had never encountered a species like humanity before, and humanity had never encountered a challenge like the Empire. The collision between these two civilizations would reshape the galaxy forever.